are going to have in this session as a photo of yours. So everybody wants to see what the topic will be, can click on your picture and enlarge it and can read the description of what's going to happen. What are we talking about in this book?
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. We'll definitely get to doing that. And Soros, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
We're just talking about Clubhouse as a new means to share as we're on Zoom doing these sessions and then streaming somehow. Soros, if you would be able to help make this possible. We just started a Clubhouse called Ask a Baha'i on Clubhouse. It's a group. So everyone who is here can join and vice versa. The Zoom sessions we have on www.clearwaterbaha'is.org. Everyone is welcome to join, and we appreciate being able to get this also streaming directly on Clubhouse. So assistance is needed, and we'll hopefully get there. So with that being said, I want to invite everyone to get to know our speaker today. Our speaker in this series is Mr. Ehsan Bayat. I was going to say doctor. He's from a family of doctors, all of our doctors. Some of you in the Persian crowd may know Dr. Qasem Bayat, who speaks on various subjects. He's on TV, right, Ehsan?
That's correct. That's correct. He's very well known in the Persian community, Baha'i and non-Baha'i Persian community.
Beautiful, beautiful. I wanted to say that now that we're beginning our session on August 22nd, 2021 on Advent and Divine Justice, Ehsan Bayat and we have a special program today that we're going to be extending to, and Ehsan's going to describe that. But first, we're going to start with the opening prayer. And because we are in Florida, we're going to say the teaching prayer for the southern states. And after we say this beautiful prayer, we're going to then begin the actual program. Soros, would you like to say the prayer? I'm going to share the screen so people on Zoom can see it.
John, you got to go to the tab.
Yeah, it hasn't loaded. But here we have this one.
O my God, thou seest me in my lowliness and weakness, occupied with the greatest undertaking, determined to raise thy word among the masses, and to spread thy teachings among thy peoples. How can I succeed unless thou assist me with the breath of the Holy Spirit? Help me to triumph by the hosts of thy glorious kingdom, and shower upon me thy confirmations, which alone can change a gnat into an eagle, a drop of water into rivers and seas, and an atom into lights and suns. O my Lord, assist me with thy triumphant and effective might, so that my tongue may utter thy praises and attributes among all people, and my soul overflow with the wine of thy love and knowledge. Thou art the omnipotent, and the doer of whatsoever thou willest. Abdul Baha.
Well, thank you very much, Surush. Thank you very much, John. So we, dear friends, we're on part 7 of exploring the advent of divine justice. This is covering this is our 7th session, but we're starting part 6. And in part 6, we're going to be covering paragraph 16. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we go. Now, here we go. Okay, so we're going to be covering paragraph 16. And today, we're just going to be reading paragraph 16. We're not going to be getting into all the dimensions. And I'm going to share you why. Because there is so much in this one paragraph that I have already over 100 slides. And we're going to get into that. Not that we're not going to get into it. But the reason is this one slide, this one paragraph, paragraph 16 of the Advent of Divine Justice. You see how long it is? This is just paragraph 16. It may look like a long paragraph, but the beloved guardian wrote a 23-page letter to the United States of America. And if you recall, this letter, Advent of Divine Justice, was written 45 years after the first announcement of the faith in America. It was 1893, the first announcement of the faith in America, and this letter was written in 1938. So the beloved guardian, 40 years after the first announcement, he wrote another letter. So 40 years after, he wrote another letter, and that letter is called America and the Most Great Peace. So after we read this paragraph, dear friends, I want you to, we're going to be coming back to Advent of Divine Justice, okay? After we study America and the Most Great Peace. We're going to segue in it after reading this paragraph. So you're going to get a really full picture of the early American Baha'i community. Then we're going to get back into Advent, okay? So this is what we're going to do to this week, next week, next week, next week, next week. It's about 4 or 5 sessions. We'll be jumping into America and the Most Great Peace to give you as full a history of the early American Baha'i community. And the reason why I'm doing this, dear friends, is very important. It's twofold. One, to give that history of the early American Baha'i community. When we earlier said we are spiritual descendants of the dawn breakers, right? The dawn breakers, we often think about they're members of the cradle of the faith because the book is called The Dawn Breakers, right? So we immediately think, oh, those are the dawn breakers. So we're descendants of those ones. But also the dawn breakers are those early American Baha'i heroes and heroines that were going from championing the faith at a very difficult point and difficult time. And we, as American Baha'i community, are descendants of them. So we should know our history. That's one reason that I'm sharing America and the Most Great Peace. Another reason I'm sharing this in the correlating with paragraph 16 is because America and the Most Great Peace also sets the stage of when we're going to be talking about America's spiritual destiny, which is one of the hallmark themes of Advent of Divine Justice. And so we're going to really get into it. And there's, I'm going to really point out the closing paragraph of America and the Most Great Peace. And I'm not going, that's my teaser, as they say. So I urge you also in your privacy to study America and the Most Great Peace. It's an incredible world order letter. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask dear Suresh John to read this paragraph 16. This is coming from Advent of Divine Justice. Thank you.
A community, relatively negligible in its numerical strength, separated by vast distances from both the focal center of its faith and the land wherein the preponderating mass of its fellow believers reside, bereft in the main of material resources and lacking in experience and in prominence, ignorant of the beliefs, concepts, and habits of those peoples and races from which its spiritual founders have sprung, wholly unfamiliar with the languages in which its sacred books were originally revealed, constrained to place its sole reliance upon an inadequate rendering of only a fragmentary portion of the literature embodying its laws, its tenets, and its history, subjected from its infancy to tests of extreme severity, involving at times the defection of some of its most prominent members, having to contend ever since its inception, and in an ever-increasing measure, with the forces of corruption, of moral laxity, and ingrained prejudice, such a community, in less than half a century, and unaided by any of its sister communities, whether in the East or in the West, has by virtue of the celestial potency with which an all-loving master has abundantly endowed it, lent an impetus to the onward march of the cause it has espoused, which the combined achievements of its co-religionists in the West have failed to rival.
Excellently read, dear Suruchan. So in this paragraph, paragraph 16, out of the whole 124 paragraphs of Adventist Divine Justice, the beloved guardian is now really focusing in this one paragraph, singularly, the early American Baha'i community's history, okay? And that it stands apart because of, not only because of its achievements, but because of all the tough trials and tribulations that it was beset by. This is, I quote here, it was a community negligible in its numerical strength. It was just a handful of individuals, and also separated by great distances, vast distances from the focal center of its faith. So it's all the way in Iran, the Persian community, here in America. Then on top of it, language, big differences in language. So most of the materials were not in translation. So they didn't even have translated writings. Bereft of material resources, lacking in experience, prominence, ignorant of the beliefs, concepts, habits of those people and races from which its spiritual founders have sprung. As I mentioned, wholly unfamiliar with the languages of the sacred books, which they were originally revealed. What incredible tests this early American Baha'i community faced. And then constrained to place its sole reliance upon an inadequate rendering of only a fragmentary portion of the literature embodying its laws, tenets, history, subjected from its infancy to these tests of extreme severity. And we're going to be talking about this in much greater detail in America, the Most Great Peace. Then, once we finish America, Most Great Peace, we're going to come back to studying this paragraph in detail too. So what are all these incredible tests, extreme severity? What is this defection of the most prominent members and having to contend ever since its inception of an ever-increasing measure with the forces, corruption, moral laxity, and ingrained prejudice? These are the three evils that the beloved guardian talks about in Advent Divine Justice. So it says, even from the beginnings, this community was facing these forces of corruption, moral laxity, and ingrained prejudice. But even though all those obstacles that this early American Baha'i community faced, what happened? And even though unaided by its sister communities in either the East or the West, by virtue of its celestial potency, which an all-loving master has abundantly endowed it, lent an impetus to this onward march of this cause. Even though all the obstacles we mentioned, and with unaided by any community, it still proceeded with an onward march. Now we're going to be exploring in detail, because the beloved guardian wrote this 23-page paper, this letter to the United States entitled America, the Most Great Peace. And in that letter, he breaks this down, what this history is. And so I don't want to paraphrase, I don't want to use my own words. So we're going to go to the study on that. So I'm going to stop share. We're going to go to America, the Most Great Peace, so you can we can go into that one, okay? And because that is, my dear friends, something that is, this is America part 1. This is 6. Yes, this is it. Share. Okay, here we go. So this is America and the Most Great Peace. And this is one of the world order letters, okay? Written 1933. So to reference, we're studying Advent of Divine Justice, written December 25th, 1938. This was Rezvan, 1933, okay? So 5 years earlier. So in this part 1, we'll finish part 1 and we'll probably get through a good chunk of part 2 today. I'm going to give you an introduction of America and the Most Great Peace and some chronology of events during this 1932-1933 period that sets the stage of this letter, as well as because the beloved guardian is now giving a history of all those events that the beloved guardian mentioned, defections, trials, tribulations of the early American Baha'i community. So that's why I'm bringing this letter into context. The World Order of Baha'u'llah. You may have heard of it. The World Order of Baha'u'llah, it is comprised of 7 letters. It is a collection of letters and messages from the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi. And it was first published in 1938. The letters it compiles establish a clear vision of the relation between the Baha'i community and the process of social evolution under the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, establishing the administrative order as the nucleus and pattern of the world civilization emerging. So here we are, dear friends. These are the 7 letters that comprise the World Order of Baha'u'llah. So the first one is entitled the World Order of Baha'u'llah. That's in the World Order of Baha'u'llah selected letters. Is entitled the World Order of Baha'u'llah. And this one was written February 1929. The second letter is called the World Order of Baha'u'llah, Further Considerations. That one's actually a very short letter. There's another one called the Goal of a New World Order. This is written in November 1931. Another is the Golden Age of the Cause of Baha'u'llah, written March 1932. The one we're going to be studying in detail is America and the Most Great Peace. And so this was Rezvan, April 1933. And I've just completed a course that I will be presenting way into the future is called the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. This covers the stationhood of the Blessed Bab, Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, as well as it goes into what is this administrative order, namely the Supreme Body, Universal House of Justice, as well as the guardianship. And so this is the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, incredible document, February 1934. And his last world order letter is the Unfoldment of World Civilization, March 1936. And the World Order of Baha'u'llah, it was published with an introduction by Horace Hawley, and he was a hand of the cause of God, a notable hand of the cause of God. And an excerpt, there was the first edition of the compilation, was published 1938, and it was later revised, published 1955, reprinted 1965. So in 2003, the Rezvan message, I'm sure you all remember this, the Universal House of Justice wrote, "Let them, the friends of God, strive to understand more deeply the teachings that are relevant by reviewing letters of Shoghi Effendi, which have been published in the World Order of Baha'u'llah, particularly those entitled The Goal of a New World Order, America and the Most Great Peace, and The Unfoldment of World Civilization." So scrolling back, The Goal of a New World Order, this one, America and the Most Great Peace, and The Unfoldment of World Civilization. Okay, so those are the 3 that was the Universal House of Justice encouraged the friends in this Rezvan message to particularly study. Okay, so we're going to be studying America and the Most Great Peace because it ties directly to Advent of Divine Justice in paragraph 16 in the sense of the history of the early American Baha'i community. So I'm sure all of you have read The Priceless Pearl, the incredible work of Rhea Khanum. And in it, she mentions the works of the beloved guardian. And here, Rhea Khanum writes, in 1933, he, namely Shoghi Effendi, gave the North American Bahá'ís America and the Most Great Peace, which dealt largely with the role this part of the world has been destined by God to play during this period in history, recalled the self-sacrificing journeys and services of the Master in the West, and recapitulated the victories already won for the faith by this favored community. So here, Rhea Khanum is saying, this is talking about this community, namely America, talking about the self-sacrificing journeys, the services that the Master did when he went for 239 days traveling to North America, and also recapitulating the victories already won for the faith by this community. So he's bringing it all back. And again, this is from Rhea Khanum. She mentions America and the Most Great Peace twice throughout The Priceless Pearl. And here she writes, in America and the Most Great Peace, written in 1933, Shoghi Effendi states America's position in unmistakable terms. Out of the anguish following the Master's passing, he wrote, the administration of Baha'u'llah's invincible faith was born. The ascension of Abdul-Baha released potent energies, which crystallized into this supreme, this infallible organ for the accomplishment of a divine purpose. The will and testament of Abdul-Baha had set forth its character and provisions. America had espoused the cause of the administration. It was given to her, and to her alone, to become the fearless champion of that administration, the pivot of its newborn institutions, and the leading promoter of its influence. That is such an incredible and powerful statement here. It was given to her, namely America, and to her alone, to become the fearless champion of the administration, the pivot of its newborn institutions, and the leading promoter of its influence, namely America. So America, this is the country we're talking about, America and the Most Great Peace. The beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi, reviews the momentous events that have transpired since the first announcement of the faith in America. So remember, dear friends, 1893, that's when the first announcement of the faith came. So now the beloved guardian is being that supreme sociologist, that surveyor of the events that have transpired. So here now, 40 years after the faith has been promulgated, the name has been promulgated in America, he is now writing this letter of all the events that have happened and sends this letter called America and the Most Great Peace. And calls the American believers to still greater heights and responsibilities. So this is a 23-page letter. It was dated Rezvan, 21st April, 1933, and it was addressed to the United States and Canada on the passage of 40 years after the first public reference to Baha'u'llah and his faith in the United States. Shoghi Effendi outlines the distinctions achieved by the American Baha'i community in service to the cause. So this is really the beloved guardian's history of the early American Baha'i community. And that one paragraph, paragraph 16, is a snapshot of his history and advent of divine justice. So I just wanted you to have a fuller picture of the history. So then when we go back to Advent, you have a much better picture of what the beloved guardian is thinking and saying, because this was written 5 years prior. So these are some of the chronology of events that were happening during this time. So 1931, the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi translated Baha'u'llah's chief doctrinal work, Kitab-i-Iran, 1931. This was first published. In Canada, there are still only 30 Baha'is in Canada. 1931, the first Chinese translation of Baha'u'llah in a New Era was published. And as you recall, this was a period called the Great Depression. Unemployment in America had reached 8 million people. Another interesting event was Britain abandoned the gold standard. This caused the price of the pound sterling to fall dramatically by almost $1.50, which was equivalent in that sense. So the bankruptcy of the German Donat Bank leads to closure of all German banks. So this was during the period right after World War I. So prior to eventually coming up to World War II, this was causing bankruptcy of all the banks. The New York Baha'i community drafts the Baha'i laws of a Baha'i local spiritual assembly, and they become the pattern for all local Baha'i constitutions throughout the world. So isn't that interesting? Abdul Baha himself comes to America and declares New York City the city of the covenant. And New York, what does the New York Baha'i community do? Independently, it drafts the bylaws of what a Baha'i local spiritual assembly, how it should act in accordance. And that constitution becomes the pattern for all the spiritual assemblies around the world. I think that's so cool. And then because this is also how prior we read that the American Baha'i community right here, it was given to her and to her alone to become the fearless champion of that administration, the pivot of its newborn institutions, and here, the leading promoter of its influence, right? So coming from America, and in that sense, even coming from New York City, that constitution of what a spiritual assembly is. Now there is a spiritual assembly going to be in every city on this planet. And it came from first, namely United States, and coming from the city of the covenant, New York City. So it's an incredible distinction and honor bestowed upon the United States here.
The constitution drafted here by the New York Baha'i community, was that done by the executive committee? Do you know, are you familiar with the executive committee? I've heard about this before.
Yes. You're absolutely right. I will go further into the detail on that, dear Suresh John. Great question. Yes, there was members of an executive committee, and they drafted it, that early constitution. Yeah,
Thanks.
Great. Thank you. And in this year, the Persian, later Iranian government imposes restrictions on the import of Baha'i books, and periodicals by post and the publication of Baha'i literature, Baha'i marriages are not recognized. So this is now the start of persecution of the Baha'i community in 1932. And so this was this is also mentioned talking about in the cradle of the faith in Advent to Divine Justice, when we talked about it earlier, that persecutions now were occurring in the cradle of the faith. Now talking about when the faith was momentarily eclipsed, this is when in talking about when the faith was momentarily eclipsed in Germany, when Advent to Divine Justice, this was the rise of Hitler. And Hitler refused Hindenburg's offer to become vice chancellor. And later, coming all the way up to World War II, 1938, this is when the faith was eclipsed. So in 1932, famine occurred in USSR, and then tied it to the faith. What happened in 1932? There were pilgrims In April, pilgrims are allowed for the first time to stay overnight at Bahji. Imagine that, to be able to stay overnight in Bahji as a pilgrim. That was allowed in 1932. In June, the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States and Canada addressed a petition to the Shah of Iran requesting he remove the ban on Baha'i literature. And the Guardian's representative to deliver this petition is Mrs. Keith Ransom Keller. This was a task that she was called to do, to request the removal on ban of Baha'i literature. And in 1932, the greatest holy leaf, Bahir Khanum, the outstanding heroine of the Baha'i dispensation, she passed away in Haifa. So this formally ended the heroic age in 1932. So I'm just sharing these key events so you get the stage of what, as we enter into 1933, what all these events. November, December, Baha'i representatives plead their case for the possession of the House of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad before the 22nd session of the Permanent Mandates Commission of the League of Nations in Geneva. So this was their, so they went to League of Nations and pleaded the case for the House of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad. Then, coming up, Japan withdrew from the League of Nations. And then later, 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes the German Chancellor. And in the 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was inaugurated as the 32nd President of the United States. And coming up, Hitler granted dictatorial powers. This is where he became a true dictator in 1933. And immediately he started erecting these first concentration camps by the Nazis in Germany. So he immediately started to go to work to creating concentration camps. And lastly, the United States recognizes the USSR and resumes trade. So these are major world events, and tying them to what was going on in the early Baha'i community at different stages. So there you are, dear friends. That gives you a snapshot of not only the importance of the American Most Great Peace in relation to what events were going on around the world. So we're now going into start reading it, as well as giving you some perspective on it. Any thoughts or questions at this time before we move on? Okay, very good. Let me share my screen. Now we'll go to, oh, not that one. We go to part 2. There we go. So this is now part 2 of American, the Most Great Peace. So here we go. We're going to be covering the paragraphs 1 through 8, as well as an introduction. So I will, Suresh John and myself will, and whoever else, we can invite them to read. So Suresh John, you could have the first paragraph. Go for it.
To the beloved of the Lord and the handmaids of the merciful throughout the United States and Canada, friends and fellow promoters of the faith of God, 40 years will have elapsed ere the close of this coming summer since the name of Baha'u'llah was first mentioned on the American continent. Strange indeed must appear to every observer pondering in his heart the significance of so great a landmark in the spiritual history of the great American Republic, the circumstances which have attended this first public reference to the author of our beloved faith. Strangers still must seem the associations which the brief words uttered on that historic occasion must have evoked in the minds of those who heard them.
Excellent. Of pomp and circumstance, of any manifestations of public rejoicing or of popular applause, there were none to greet this first intimation to America's citizens of the existence and purpose of the revelation proclaimed by Baha'u'llah. Nor did he who was its chosen instrument profess himself a believer in the indwelling potency of the tidings he conveyed, or suspect the magnitude of the forces which so cursory a mention was destined to release. Announced through the mouth of an avowed supporter of that narrow ecclesiasticism which the faith itself has challenged and seeks to extirpate, characterized at the moment of its birth as an obscure offshoot of a contemptible creed, the message of the most great name, fed by streams of unceasing trial and warmed by the sunshine of Abdu'l-Bahá's tender care, has succeeded in driving its roots deep into America's genial soil, has, in less than half a century, sent out its shoots and tendrils as far as the remotest corners of the globe, and now stands clothed in the majesty of the consecrated edifice it has reared in the heart of that continent, determined to proclaim its right and vindicate its capacity to redeem a stricken people, unsupported by any of the advantages which talent, rank, and riches can confer. The community of the American believers, despite its tender age, its numerical strength, its limited experience, has, by virtue of the inspired wisdom, the united will, the incorruptible loyalty of its administrators and teachers, achieved the distinction of an undisputed leadership among its sister communities of East and West in hastening the advent of the golden age anticipated by Baha'u'llah. Before we go to paragraph 4, you see the similarities in this paragraph, all of to paragraph 16 of Advent of Divine Justice. You see how almost from halfway down, unsupported by any of the advantages which talent, rank, and riches can confer. In paragraph 16, we read all those challenges that the American Baha'i community had: numerical strength, limited experience, virtues of inspired wisdom. And then it talks about how, and even mentions that the distinction of an undisputed leadership among its sister communities in East or West. You went with the beloved guardian and added paragraph 16 of Advent. It says, unaided by any of the communities, whether East or West. So this is really a direct tie-in in paragraph 3. Did someone have a question or hand? I heard someone by chance. Please.
Yes. So the meaning of extirpate, I was going to ask during the paragraph reading, but it's good to say afterward that it's to root out and destroy completely. That's the meaning. So the question is about this sentence up to the comma: announced through the mouth of an avowed supporter of that narrow ecclesiasticism which the faith itself has challenged and seeks to extirpate. Can you please explain what the faith is challenging and seeks to extirpate? What is that narrow ecclesiasticism?
Okay, so an avowed supporter of that narrow ecclesiasticism which the faith has challenged and seeks to extirpate. So this is whether it's the narrow understanding of either Islam, that it's an offshoot of Islam. So this is the American Baha'i community is seeking to extirpate and saying that it's an independent faith and that it's not an obscure offshoot of a contemptible creed. So this is, we're going to, all the definitions, my dear John, are coming up. So this is just a initial reading, and then we're going to—
I have a question.
Please.
Is this relevant to the announcement that the Baha'is are not a part of this religion? Is that what Shoghi Effendi is referring to? There was an announcement in Egypt where they said that the Baha'is have nothing to do with Islam. And it was that announcement that rather than taking it as a loss, as another attack on the faith. The guardian, Shoghi Effendi, used it as a means to justify to the world, look, the Muslims themselves say we are not Muslim, we're not a sect of Islam, we are an independent world religion.
Absolutely, dear John. Absolutely. So this was also a clarification of the station of the faith, that it is an independent world faith and not a mere offshoot, a mere sect, a mere schism. And so, and also in America, it had been branded many times as a cult. And so the faith itself here is announced through the mouth of an avowed supporter of that narrow ecclesiastic which the faith has challenged and seeks to extirpate. Before we move on, Miss Jeannie has a hand. I want to go to Miss Jeannie so I don't lose people. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, who was it that announced it in New York? Who it says announced through the mouth of an avowed supporter. Who exactly was that? I think in paragraph 2 it tells.
Yes, it was here, Dr. Henry Jessup. It was at the Parliament of Religions at the Columbian Exposition, Chicago, 1893. We're going to get into that coming up, okay? So this individual, it was through his mouth, and later on, he did not accept the faith and actually attacked the faith. But it was his narrowness and his understanding, and he did not, and even in his later writings, and I will show all of these to you, dear friends, so that you have a wider scope of what is the beloved guardian saying when he said he did not accept the message, and what did he say? And so, because all of this is tied in America, the Most Great Peace, okay? Because this is our early American Baha'i history. So moving on. And yet how grave the crises which this infant, this blessed community has weathered in the course of its checkered history. How slow and painful the process that gradually brought it forth from the obscurity of unmitigated neglect to the broad daylight of public recognition, and how severe the shocks which the ranks of its devoted adherents have sustained through the defection of the faint in heart, the malice of the mischief maker, the treachery of the proud and the ambitious. What storms of ridicule, of abuse, and of calumny its representatives have had to face in their staunch support of the integrity and their valiant defense of the fair name of the faith they had espoused. How persistent the vicissitudes and disconcerting the reverses with which its privileged members, young and old alike, individually and collectively, have had to contend in their heroic endeavors to scale the heights which a loving master had summoned them to attain. So here, dear friends, the beloved guardian is again talking about the incredible trials and sufferings that this early American community is going through, storms of ridicule and the malice of the mischief maker, defections, and all of those were just touched on in paragraph 16, but you see how it is expanded in America, the Most Great Peace. And in this paragraph, I'll read this one, it's rather long and the font size has changed. Many and powerful have been its enemies, who, as soon as they discovered the evidences of the growing ascendancy of its declared supporters, have vied with one another in hurling at its face the vilest imputations and in pouring out upon the object of its devotion the vials of their fiercest wrath. How often have these sneered at the scantiness of its resources and the seeming stagnation of its life? How bitterly they ridiculed its origins and, misconceiving its purpose, dismissed it as a useless appendage of an expiring creed? Have they not, in their written attacks, stigmatized the heroic person of the forerunner of so holy a revelation as a coward recanter, a perverted apostate, and denounced the entire range of his voluminous writings as the idle chatter of a thoughtless man? Have they not chosen to ascribe to its divine founder the basest motives which an unscrupulous plotter and usurper can conceive, and regarded the center of his covenant as the embodiment of ruthless tyranny, a stir of mischief, and a notorious exponent of expediency and fraud? Its world unifying principles, these impotent enemies of a steadily rising faith, have time and again denounced as fundamentally defective, have pronounced its all-embracing program as utterly fantastic, and regarded its vision of the future as chimerical and positively deceitful. The fundamental verities that constitute its doctrine, its foolish ill-wishers have represented as a cloak of idle dogma. Its administrative machinery they have refused to differentiate from the soul of the faith itself, and the mysteries it reveres and upholds they have identified with sheer superstition. The principle of unification which it advocates and with which it stands identified, they have misconceived as a shallow attempt at uniformity. Its repeated assertions of the reality of supernatural agencies they have condemned as a vain belief in magic, and the glory of its idealism they have rejected as mere utopia. Every process of purification whereby an inscrutable wisdom chose from time to time to purge the body of his chosen followers of the defilement, of the undesirable and the unworthy, these victims of an unrelenting jealousy have hailed as a symptom of the invading forces of schism, which were soon to sap its strength, vitiate its vitality, and complete its ruin.
Yeah, Ehsan. So we have two people, Scott Martin and then Sandra Norris, who have volunteered to read, just so you know.
Excellent. I truly appreciate it. Wonderful. So here, the beloved guardian, through this long paragraph, in paragraph 5 of American, the Most Great Peace, is now outlining just some of the attacks that these individuals are launching at this early community, this early American Baha'i community. Everything that the faith stands for is they twist and turn and change it, distort it, and make it and change its so that it becomes, as they said, the beloved guardian says, fantastical, utopian, so that all of the practical, logical, and well-conceived, I say, ideas and principles that the faith espouses, they have been distorted and ridiculed and misconceived, and again dismissed by these attacks, and that have been hurled by these enemies of the faith. So this is just an outline here in paragraph 5 of how the enemies in the history of the early American Baha'i community have launched at this faith. So you mentioned this, Steve, is that right, John? Oh, I see a Scott.
Sure.
Go for it, Scott. Please, you're up. Go for it. Good to see you.
It's either Scott or Steve. No problem. That's good.
Go
I'm
for
not
it.
as funny as Steve Martin, but yeah, I'll try. Okay. Dearly loved, beloved friends, it is not for me, nor does it seem within the competence of any one of the present generation to trace the exact and full history of the rise and gradual consolidation of this invincible arm, this mighty organ of a continually advancing cause. It would be premature at this early stage of its evolution to attempt an exhaustive analysis or to arrive at a just estimate of the impelling forces that have urged it forward to occupy so exalted a place among the various instruments which the hand of omnipotence has fashioned and is now perfecting for the execution of his divine purpose. Future historians of this mighty revelation, endowed with pens abler than any which its present-day supporters can claim to possess, will no doubt transmit to posterity a masterly exposition of the origins of those forces which, through a remarkable swing of the pendulum, have caused the administrative center of the faith to gravitate away from its cradle to the shores of the American continent and towards its very heart, the present mainspring and chief bulwark of its fast evolving institutions. On them will devolve the task of recording the history and of estimating the significance of so radical a revolution in the fortunes of a slowly maturing faith. Theirs will be the opportunity to extol the virtues and to immortalize the memory of those men and women who have participated in its accomplishment. Theirs will be the privilege of evaluating the share which each of these champion builders of the world order of Baha'u'llah has had in ushering in that golden millennium, the promise of which lies enshrined in his teachings.
Wow, wow. Beautifully read, Scott. Thank you, thank you. So in this paragraph, so powerful, the beloved guardian is saying, it's not my job to give a full history of the early American Baha'i community. We said it would be premature at this early stage to attempt this exhaustive analysis. But he says future historians, future individuals will arise, and it will be on them to do that. And so one line that's just so incredibly amazing. It says, I'll read this again. It says, future historians of this mighty revelation endowed with pens, abler than any which its present day supporters can claim to possess, will no doubt transmit to posterity a masterly exposition of the origins of those forces, which through a remarkable swing of the pendulum, this is amazing, through a remarkable swing of the pendulum, have caused the administrative center of the faith to gravitate away from its cradle to the shores of the American continent and towards its very heart, the present mainspring and chief bulwark of its fast evolving institutions. What imagery. Now suddenly the pendulum has swung, and now it is, at one point it was in the cradle center of the faith, and now it's come to the American continent. And then later on them will devolve the task of recording the history, estimating the significance of so radical a revolution, the fortunes, slowly maturing faith. And it will be on them. Theirs will be the opportunity to extol the virtues, to immortalize the memory of those men, women who have participated in this accomplishment. And theirs will be the privilege of evaluating the share with which these champion builders of the world order of Baha'u'llah has had in ushering in that golden millennium. So the future historians have an incredible task of capturing this early American Baha'i history. And so every one of you should be one of those historians as you're studying this history and soaking it in. And so, dear friends, I hope this meager study of this Advent of Divine Justice, as well as American Most Great Peace, will add some flavor to our study together. So let us go to paragraph 7. Dear John, who was the other friend you mentioned?
Yes, our other friend is Sandra Norris. If Sandra, you would be happy to read.
Yes, let's get Sandra, please. Thank you.
Does not the history of primitive Christianity and of the rise of Islam, each in its own way, offer a striking parallel to this strange phenomenon, the beginnings of which we are now witnessing in this, the first century of the Baha'i era? Has not the divine impulse which gave birth to each of these great religious systems been driven through the operation of those forces which the irresistible growth of the faith itself had released to seek away from the land of its birth and in more propitious climes, a ready field and a more adequate medium for the incarnation of its spirit and the propagation of its cause? Have not the Asiatic churches of Jerusalem, of Antioch, and of Alexandria, consisting chiefly of those Jewish converts, whose character and temperament incline them to sympathize with the traditional ceremonies of the most, of the most Mosaic dispensation, been forced as they steadily declined to recognize the growing ascendancy of their Greek and Roman brethren? Have they not been compelled to acknowledge the superior valor and the trained efficiency which have enabled these standard bearers of the cause of Jesus Christ to erect the symbols of his worldwide dominion on the ruins of a collapsing empire? Has not the animating spirit of Islam been constrained under the pressure of similar circumstances to abandon the inhospitable wastes of its Arabian home, the theater of its greatest sufferings and exploits, to yield in a distant land the fairest fruit of its slowly maturing civilization?
Thank you, dear Sandra. Thank you. So here the beloved guardian in this paragraph, paragraph 7, is tying this, as this faith at this point in time, written in 1933, is still in the first century of the Baha'i era. And he's saying, has not this divine impulse which gave birth to each of these great religious systems been driven through the operation of those forces which the irresistible growth of their faith had released to seek away from the land of its birth and in a more propitious climes? He's tying the history of the Baha'i era, tying it to the similarities in the dispensation of Christianity, dispensation of Islam. And so he's saying all the issues and problems that this early American Baha'i communities went through is very similar in the sense of trials and tribulations to the sufferings and trials and tribulations during the period of Christianity and Islam. Granted, there wasn't mass martyrdoms in early American Baha'i communities, compared to early American Christianity as well as Islam, but there was also trials and tribulations and sufferings and other serious issues in the community. So here the beloved guardian is directly tying that in the first century of not only of Christianity, of Islam, there was great trials and tribulations. And so he's saying this faith is in the stage of being nascent. And in this, I believe this is the last paragraph we're going to be covering. Yes, in this part, I'll read this one. From the beginning of time until the present day, Abdul-Baha himself affirms, the light of divine revelation hath risen in the east and shed its radiance upon the west. The illumination thus shed hath, however, acquired in the west an extraordinary brilliancy, considered earth proclaimed by Jesus. Though it first appeared in the east, yet not until its light had been shed upon the west did the full measure of its potentialities become manifest. The day is approaching, he in another passage assures us, when ye shall witness how, through the splendor of the faith of Baha'u'llah, the West will have replaced the East, radiating the light of divine guidance. In the books of the prophets, he again asserts, certain glad tidings are recorded which are absolutely true and free from doubt. The East hath ever been the dawning place of the Sun of Truth. In the East, all the prophets of God have appeared. The West hath acquired illumination from the East, but in some respects, the reflection of the light hath been greater in the Occident. This is specially true of Christianity. Jesus Christ appeared in Palestine, and his teachings were founded in that country, although the doors of the kingdom were first opened in that land, and the bestowals of God were spread broadcast from its center. The people of the West have embraced and promulgated Christianity more fully than the peoples of the East. So here the beloved guardian is saying, though all the messengers of God have appeared in the East, it is the West which really has gone and opened the doors of the kingdom and really been the light that has radiated from the West is even greater than the light that has been radiated from the East in this sense. So, as it says here, though it first appeared in the East, yet not until its light had been shed upon the West did the full measure of its potentialities become manifest. And here the beloved guardian expounds on that from Abdul Baha. So now addressing, as always I do, these major key points from these paragraphs. So we read 8 paragraphs from American the Most Great Peace. The beloved guardian outlines the circumstances of the first public reference to Baha'u'llah in America. The American Baha'i community has achieved the distinction of leadership among its sister communities of East and West in hastening the advent of the golden age anticipated by Baha'u'llah. And the American Baha'i community has weathered grave crises in its history: defections, treachery, ridicule, abuse and calumny, vicissitudes, and reverses beset both individuals and the community as they strive to reach heights the Master summoned them to attain. So these were all the issues and problems that we read about in paragraph 16 of Advent to Divine Justice. Okay, Scott, could you read this slide?
Sure. Major key points from paragraphs 1 through 8. Attacks of enemies who assail the tenets of the faith, its founder, its forerunner, its fundamental verities, its administrative machinery, the principle of unification, and the process of purification. Now, the point is, future historians will analyze how the administrative center of the faith has gravitated away from its cradle to the American continent, the chief bulwark of its fast evolving institutions, and will immortalize the men and women who have participated in building the administrative order. Both Christianity and Islam offer a striking parallel to the development of the faith, flourishing in lands where in lands more hospitable than the lands of origin. And also Abdul Baha attests, quote, "The light of divine revelation hath arisen in the East and shed its radiance upon the West," unquote. Such was the case with Christianity.
Excellently read, dear Scott. Thank you. So these are mini summaries of the paragraphs that we read. So let us now go through paragraph 1, and then we're going to go through each one, so you have a really solid understanding. And also we'll also be going through, this is like a in detailed study that we're going to do. So 40 years, this was in paragraph 1. I've highlighted it. To the beloved of the Lord and the handmaids of the merciful throughout the United States and Canada. So this is very similar to the opening of Advent of Divine Justice. It was written to the loved ones that were throughout the United States and Canada. Is also Advent of Divine Justice. So now here, this is 40 years. Advent of Divine Justice was 45 years. So here, 40 years will have elapsed ere the close of this coming summer since the name of Baha'u'llah was first mentioned on the American continent. So here, 1893 was the first mention of the name of Baha'u'llah in the American continent. And as we read earlier, American the Most Great Peace was written 1933, 40 years after it. So I've highlighted all definitions that and words that might be challenging throughout it. So here, strangers still must seem the associations with which the brief words uttered on that historic occasion must have evoked. Evoked means stirred up, bring to mind, suggest. So this was by this Dr. Henry H. Jessup. So of pomp and circumstance, pomp, ceremony, spectacle, display, pageantry. So how he talked and, brought these words up of any manifestations of public rejoicing or of popular applause, there were none to greet this first intimation. And it was just an intimation. It was just a few words. So it was literally just a few words. It was a hint, an inkling, just mentioning of the faith. And that inkling to America's citizens of the existence and purpose of the revelation proclaimed by Baha'u'llah. Nor did he, who was its chosen instrument, and we're going to talk about who was that chosen instrument, profess himself a believer in the indwelling potency. So here the beloved guardian, paragraph 2, is saying he did not accept the faith, nor did he believe it, or profess himself to believe in the indwelling potency. Potency is great power, authority, strength of the tidings he conveyed, or suspect the magnitude of the forces which so cursory means brief, hasty, superficial. So he just quickly mentioned the faith. He just casually, and so it was just so quick and brief mention of the faith. So as I mentioned, anything I put in red, I make into a slide. So this is the chosen instrument that the beloved guardian mentions. In paragraphs 1 through 3, the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi, shares the circumstances of the first public reference to Baha'u'llah in America. And in paragraph 2, the beloved guardian writes that Reverend Henry H. Jessup, 1832 to 1910. He was a director of Presbyterian missionary operations in Syria, was the chosen instrument for the first proclamation of Baha'u'llah in America. So there is a picture of him, Dr. Henry H. Jessup. And this is the occasion. This is where it happened. This is the Columbia Exposition, 1893. So on September 23rd, 1893, Chicago, it became the site of the first public mention of the Baha'i faith in America. Suresh John, you could pick up reading from right here at the World's Parliament. Go for it.
At the World Parliament of Religions held in Chicago in connection with the World's Columbian Exposition, the Baha'i faith was mentioned for the first time in the West. A paper written by the Reverend Henry H. Jessup, who was serving in Syria, quoted words spoken by Baha'u'llah in 1890 to the Orientalist Edward Granville Brown that gave utterance to sentiments so noble, so Christ-like, that we repeat them as our closing words. That all nations should become one in faith and all men as brothers. That the bond of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened. That diversity of religions should cease and differences of race be annulled. What harm is there in this? Yet so it shall be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Do not you in Europe need this also? Let not a man glory in this, that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind.
Excellent. Thank you. So this was the first mention, September 23rd, 1893, where he is quoted words spoken by Baha'u'llah in 1890 to Edward Granville Brown. And this is a picture of the World's Columbian Exposition in Jackson Park, Chicago, 1893. And this is the view of the Statue of the Republic, stands over guard the Great Basin, ringed by monumental buildings. It was made from plaster of Paris. A lot of these buildings no longer stand. I think there's only one of these buildings that still stands to this day, but it was quite an exposition. So on September 23rd, 1893, Reverend Henry Jessup, a Presbyterian missionary living in Syria, he delivered a paper at the Parliament about his experiences in the Middle East and describing Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i faith that was read at the conference session. And here's an extract from September 24th, 1893. So this is the day after the conference, okay? And so this is quoting, it says, where all men are brothers. In the palace of Bahji, or Delight, just outside the fortress of Acre on the Syrian coast, there died a few months since a famous Persian sage, the Babi saint named Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, the head of that vast reform party of Persian Muslims who accept the New Testament as the word of God and Christ as the deliverer of men, who regard all nations as one and all men as brothers. 3 years ago, he was visited by a Cambridge scholar and gave utterance to sentiments so noble, so Christ-like, that we repeat them as our closing words, that all nations should become one in faith, and all men as brothers, that the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened, that diversity of religion should cease, and differences of race be annulled. What harm is there in this? Yet so it shall be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Do not you in Europe need this also? Let not a man glory in this, that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind. So this, dear friends, was the first proclamation of Baha'u'llah in America, right here. And this is a quote quoted in the newspaper dated Sunday, September 24th, 1893. So the beloved guardian mentioned that Reverend Henry Jessup did not accept the faith. So here we go. Reverend Jessup proved he was no friend to the Baha'i faith when he attacked Abdul Baha in volume 2 of his autobiography, 53 Years in Syria. In that work, Jessup charges that Abbas Effendi succeeded him, Baha'u'llah, and is running the incarnation fraud for all that it is worth. So this was his work, and this is where, in this work, he attacks Abdul Baha. And also in another work, Reverend Jessup attacked the Baha'i faith in an article he wrote titled The Bahá'ís, published in The Outlook, New York, 22nd of June, 1901. This is the condensed and missionary review of the World, volume 25. So this is where it was another published work called The Bahá'ís, where he also continued his attack on this early American Baha'i community. So moving on, dear friends, now we're getting into all of those terminologies that were, were quite hard. So I have many definitions on the right. Announced through the mouth of an avowed supporter of that narrow ecclesiasticism. So avowed, affirmed, declared, acknowledged, confirmed. Avowed supporter of that narrow ecclesiasticism. Religious principles, beliefs, priesthood, clergy, which the faith itself has challenged and seeks to extirpate, uproot, cut out, destroy, exterminate. Characterized at the moment of its birth as an obscure offshoot. So it was characterized as an obscure offshoot, dim, dark, hidden, murky, vague, doubtful, of a contemptible creed. So from the moment it was born, this faith was characterized as just an offshoot. The message of the Most Great Name, fed by streams of unceasing trial and warmed by the sunshine of Abdu'l-Bahá's tender care, has succeeded in driving its roots deep into America's genial soil. Genial, warm, welcoming, amiable, pleasant, hospitable. Has in less than half a century, because this is only 40 years after 1893, in less than half a century, sent out its shoots and tendrils. So here the beloved Guardian is using the imagery of like a plant. Shoots, young leaves, and tendrils. It's vines. As far as the remotest corners of the globe. And so what are these shoots and tendrils? Those are the pioneers, the teachers of the cause. So it's shot out its shoots and tendrils to the remotest corners of the globe, and now stands clothed in the majesty of the consecrated edifice. What is this consecrated edifice? Consecrated means holy, sanctified, set apart, hallowed. Edifice, word in red. So that means we're going to have a whole slide explaining what edifice means. It has reared in the heart of that continent, determined to proclaim its right and vindicate. Vindicate means prove, justify, claim, support, prove right. So vindicate its capacity to redeem a stricken people. So this is one of the roles also of the American Baha'i community, is to vindicate, means prove true, prove, justify the claim of. So it's to the role of the American Baha'i community is also to prove true the claim of Baha'u'llah. So it's unsupported by any of the advantages which talent, rank, and riches can confer. It has not had the abilities of talent, rank, or riches in the early American Baha'i community. Despite its tender age, numerical strength, limited experience, has by virtue of the inspired wisdom, the united will, the incorruptible loyalty. Incorruptible means morally right, honest, not to be bought, honorable. Incorruptible is the opposite of corruption. So incorruptible loyalty of its administrators and teachers, achieved by the distinction of an undisputed leadership among its sister communities, East and West, in hastening the advent of the golden age anticipated by Baha'u'llah. So the bottom part, paragraph 3, American, the Most Great Peace, is very similar to paragraph 16, Advent of Divine Justice, where it outlines one after another the trials and tribulations that beset the early American Baha'i community, namely limited experience, numerical strength, all of these problems that beset that early American Baha'i community. And then then it says that even though all those problems and challenges that beset this early American Baha'i community, it still championed them in the sense of its administrators and teachers achieved the distinction of undisputed leadership among its sister communities of East and West. in hastening the advent of the golden age. So even though all these problems, this community still continue to champion all these challenges. So in paragraph 3, there was this word came out, edifice, consecrated edifice. What is edifice? The edifice referred to in paragraph 3 of American the Most Great Peace is the Baha'i House of Worship in Wilmette. So here, the beloved guardian is directly calling what it is. Abdu'l-Baha gave permission for the construction of this house of worship in 1903. The master laid the cornerstone of the building in 1912, and in 1933, when this letter was written, construction had been underway since 20th of December 1920. This is from God Passes By. And the above picture right here, it was taken shortly after the dome was put in place in 1931. And the ornamentation of the dome was completed. And in 1934, however, the remaining exterior ornamentation was not completed until World War II. So, and as we all know, the house of worship was dedicated May 1st, 1953. So from when it was given permission in 1903 to its dedication, 1953, 50 years it took from permission to dedication. So in paragraph 3, the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi, states that the American Baha'i community has achieved the distinction of leadership among its sister communities of East and West in hastening the advent of the golden age anticipated by Baha'u'llah. Here, dear friends, this is an awesome picture. This is the Baha'is of Racine, Wisconsin, 1933. So this is the time period that this letter was written. You can see them standing beside an early model of the Mashal Askar, the house of worship in Wilmette, Illinois. And then there's the other term, and this was in paragraph 3, right here at the end. And achieved the distinction of an undisputed leadership among its sister communities of East and West in hastening the advent of the golden age anticipated by Baha'u'llah. So we've talked about this golden age in our class in Advent of Divine Justice. So this golden age, as you all know, the faith is divided into 3 ages. In our last class, we actually explored that. These 3 ages, we talked about the heroic age, the formative age, as well as the golden age. And so and this is from Citadel of Faith. So I'm going to get Miss Jeannie, could you read this one for us? This is from the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi, in Citadel of Faith.
Sure. During this formative age of the faith, and in the course of present and succeeding epochs, the last and crowning stage in the erection of the framework of the administrative order of the faith of Baha'u'llah, the election of the Universal House of Justice will have been completed. The Kitabi Aqdas, the mother book of his revelation, will have been codified and its laws promulgated. The lesser peace will have been established. The unity of mankind will have been achieved and its maturity attained. The plan conceived by Abdu'l-Baha will have been executed. The emancipation of the faith from the fetters of religious orthodoxy will have been effected, and its independent religious status will have been universally recognized. Whilst in the course of the golden age destined to consummate the dispensation itself, the banner of the most great peace promised by its author will have been unfurled. The world Baha'i Commonwealth will have emerged in the plenitude of its power and splendor, and the birth and efflorescence of a world civilization, the child of that peace, will have conferred its inestimable blessings upon all mankind.
Beautifully read, dear Jeannie. So this is an extract that we read last time when we were exploring the formative age and talking about what is all the qualities in regards to the golden age. So some of these requirements for the golden age, the beloved guardian says, is first, the election of the Universal House of Justice will have been completed. This happened in 1963. The Kitab Aqdas, the mother book of his revelation, will have been codified and its laws promulgated. This has taken place. The Kitab Aqdas was codified, and now it is published and translated. And so the Kitab Aqdas the laws have been promulgated. The lesser peace will have been established. This has not taken place yet, as well as all these other ones. The unity of mankind will have been achieved and its maturity attained. All of these other ones that dear G read has not taken place yet. So this is per se where we are in the stages approaching the golden age. So right now we're in the formative age, and there are still stages to undergo in approaching that golden age, which the beloved guardian talks about. The golden age is the stage of perfection, the realization of the goals of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. And the initial stages of the golden age will be synchronized with the emergence of this world community, the consciousness of world citizenship, and the founding of a world civilization and culture. Shoghi Effendi regards such developments as the furthermost limits in the organization of human society, though man as an individual must indeed, as a result of such a consummation, continue indefinitely to progress and develop. When I think of the consciousness of world citizenship, it's where if there's a crisis on one side of the planet, there's a crisis somewhere else, that our consciousness, the borders, we do not think of our nationalistic borders, and we immediately are thinking at the world level. What can we do as world citizens to help our humanity? And this is the raised consciousness of humanity. And we can think of it that if we do not help our fellow man in crises, it also comes and affects us also directly. I'll give you an example. For example, this virus that we're battling it, as a species, because we are not helping our fellow man, raising their resources and doing nation building around the world, what happens is a lot of humanity is not only suffering the effects and perils of this disease and potentially dying around the world, but what happens is, because we are not taking it on at the world level and only per se focusing it on in our own nation, what happens is that those nations also become areas that this virus can mutate and keep adapting and changing, and then it comes back and attacks us again. So as another variant, we've heard of this variant or that variant, lambda variant, delta variant. It's because we have to take on these problems at the world level. And this takes us to a higher level of global unity to take on these type of challenges. And this is the reality is these type of challenges, we have to now understand that there's going to be worse things that are going to affect our planet. It might not be a virus, it might be other type of things that we do not know about. And these things we have to take on as a united front, as one common family, one humanity. Because if we don't, it will be to our peril. And so we're just seeing this for the first time really as a species, that if one part of the organism is not doing it, the rest of us are all suffering. And per se, some of us have to be in lockdown because some of us are not abiding by this or that. And because they would rather have their own self-interests and rather than the generality of the community's health interests. And this is very important in that sense, that we have to understand and have a flip the script kind of mentality. And what I mean by flip the script, it means that for ages, we've always thought the most important is ourselves. It first is me, myself, and I. But now we have to flip the script. Who is the most important? It's actually the world. And then from then it becomes the nations, and then eventually it goes all the way down in that sense. And eventually you realize that you are actually the least of important in that sense, you know? Your identity, yourself. The entire world is the most important. The maturation of an ever-advancing civilization. But you also have to understand that what you do affects everyone else. Your thoughts, your actions have great powers on what humanity is doing. You actually are affecting everyone around you in your environment. Here's a case and example. I'll give you just a general case and example before we move on and close this session out. For example, if I, as an individual, I talk about the faith. I talk about the faith in my immediate circle. I might be on this principle or that principle, and it just casually comes up because I love it. I can't help but talk about it, right? The people around me, whether they want to or not, get affected by it. It even impacts their thoughts, their ideas, their associations with me. And so just because of my attraction to the faith, my love for the faith, and me bringing it up, their worlds, their paradigms all get shifted. And so that's an important concept. And for example, if you, the more that the faith animates your heart and you bring it up in your conversations, casual and just bring it up gently, lovingly, it will affect their worlds, and this is, I just wanted to share that because the faith truly has answers on every subject. And this is more that we have to study. And we're going to get into that much deeper in our Advent of Divine Justice class. So this is, as I said, this is a segue going into the early American Baha'i history. So this is an extract that I love, and I've shared even this in our Advent class. And this is on the Golden Age. God's purpose is none other than to usher in ways he alone can bring about, and the full significance of which he alone can fathom, the golden age of a long divided, long afflicted humanity. Its present state, indeed, even its immediate future, is dark, distressingly dark. Its distant future, however, is radiant, gloriously radiant, so radiant that no eye can visualize it. Its immediate future is dark, distressingly dark. But we should not look at the current present. We should keep our eyes on the future. What are we working towards? Because if we look in the darkness, we will immediately get down and feel distressed. So I believe I have just a few more slides, and then I will close it off. In the course of the Golden Age, humanity will witness that the banner of the most great peace promised by its author will have been unfurled. this world Baha'i commonwealth will have emerged in the plenitude of its power and splendor, and the birth and efflorescence of a world civilization, the child of that peace, will have conferred its inestimable blessings upon all mankind. And such outcomes will be unfolded through successive epochs of the Golden Age. This is an important point, dear friends. So many times I've heard from dear Baha'i friends that we're working so hard, formative age, and then boom, just like that, we enter into the Golden Age, and it'll just be great. Can't wait for it. But the Golden Age is also going to be stages within it, okay? So that is also going to have successive epochs within it. So just like we're having successive epochs within the formative age, there will be stages within the Golden Age too. Very good. Okay, before we move on, dear John, check me on my time. How are we doing?
We are doing fine.
Okay.
We are at 4:36, and we have about 20 minutes.
Okay, excellent. Very good. Thank you, dear John.
Mhm.
Okay, so recapping paragraph 4. Now, this is an incredible paragraph. Now, this is where the beloved guardian is continuing talking about the trials that this early American Baha'i community was facing. And yet how grave the crisis is. This infant, this blessed community has weathered in the course of its checkered history. Checkered, marked by great changes in fortune. Varied. How slow and painful the process that gradually brought it forth from the obscurity, dim, dark, hidden, vague, unmitigated neglect to the broad daylight of public recognition, and how severe the shocks which the ranks of its devoted adherents or followers, have sustained through the defection. Defection means the followers, members, or advocates. Defect means to go away, to defect, of the faint in heart, the malice, hate, spite, meanness, wickedness, of the mischief maker, the treachery is betrayal, deceit, to be disloyal, treasonous, of the proud and the ambition. What storms of ridicule, of abuse, and of calumny. Calumny is slander, lying, libel, misrepresentation. Calumny, its representatives have had to face in their staunch support of the integrity and their valiant defense. Oh, I love, read this is something, my dear friends, that you should, I urge you all to do, is to read the early American Baha'i community history. It's the valiant heroes, that what they had to go through is just such an incredible episode of, and they were truly valiant and really didn't have much. They didn't have much writings. They didn't have much, every so often they got a tablet from Abdul Baha, but really didn't have much to go on. But God, they were as staunch as you got. How persistent the vicissitudes, unexpected change, alterations, the vicissitudes, and disconcerting the reverses with which its privileged members, young and old alike, individually and collectively, have had to contend in their heroic endeavors to scale the heights which a loving master had summoned them to attain. So you see how in America Most Great Peace is a massive blow up of paragraph 16. You see that? Well, technically, the beloved guardian is actually concising his entire American Most Great Peace in paragraph 16 because it's later, it's 5 years later. But that's why I wanted to bring American the Most Great Peace to your attention, because it's really the history of the early American Baha'i community. In paragraph 4, the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi states that the American Baha'i community has weathered grave crises in its history. Grave crises, defections, treachery, ridicule, abuse, and calumny, vicissitudes, and reverses. This word was mentioned directly by the Guardian in Advent. So that's why I just wanted to point that out. Treachery. And it was all, he mentions defections is the actual word. Defections. Sorry about that. Defections is the word he mentions. Beset both individuals and the community as they strive to reach heights Master summoned them to attain. So this early American Baha'i community has weathered crises, grave crises. Paragraph 5. Now the beloved Guardian is now really getting into it. He says, many and powerful have been its enemies. So now he's going to talking about all the enemies here. As soon as they discovered the evidences of this growing ascendancy, it reminds me of snakes, just ready to attack. Snakes. So the second this faith is just like a beautiful flower emerging, the snakes are just ready to strike and attack. Have vied with one another. They've worked and competed and struggled and vied with one another in hurling at its face the vilest imputations, charges and complaints, allegations, pouring upon the object of its devotion. So it's in red. So what is this object of its devotion? The vial of their fiercest wrath. So we're going to go then find out what this object of its devotion is. So in paragraph 5, Shoghi Effendi mentions the attacks of the enemies. I'm not going to read every paragraph because we technically have already read all those paragraphs. So don't want to reread every one of them. In paragraph 5, the beloved Guardian mentions the attacks of the enemies who assailed the tenets of the faith, its founder, its forerunner, and its fundamental verities, its administrative machinery, as well as the principle of unification and process of purification. So these enemies, they have attacked literally everything they could, and in every possible way they could. So who was the object of its devotion? His Holiness Abdul Baha. In the Will and Testament of Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha was named the center of the covenant of Baha'u'llah and authorized interpreter of the Baha'i revelation. The Master was freed from prison by the Young Turk Revolution of 1908, and in 1909, he placed the remains of the Blessed Bab in his tomb on Mount Carmel. This is one of the first things he did. Now think about it. He's been in prison 40 years of his life. And one of the first acts he did, moments he gets out of prison, he goes and places the sacred remains of the Blessed Bab and inters them. It's incredible, incredible. And between 1911 and 1913, Abdul Baha embarked on his Western tour. He visited Europe twice and spent 9 months from April through December in the United States and Canada, 239 days. And as we all know, he passed away in Haifa in November 1921. And this is the centenary year of his passing. It's an incredible year that we're all alive. And he is buried within the shrine of the Bab on Mount Carmel in Haifa. And as we all know, his shrine is being erected as we speak. So how cool is that? So I hope we all live to the day we can go visit that. That would be so cool. Paragraph 6. So I'm going to go to this line right down here. So paragraph 6. Theirs will be the opportunity. So this is, remember, talking about the future historians. This is the paragraph talking about the beloved Guardian felt that he felt that it was too soon to do an accurate depiction of the history of this early American Baha'i community. He said it's too soon to trace the exact and full history of the rise and gradual consolidation. So he said future historians will do that, right? So what happens is theirs will be the opportunity to extol the virtues, to immortalize the memories of those men and women who have participated in its accomplishment. Theirs will be the privilege of evaluating the share which each of these champion builders of the world order of Baha'u'llah has had in ushering that golden millennium. What is the golden millennium about? Guardians talking about here. The promise of which lies enshrined in its teachings. So I made a slide on that so we can find out what that's about. In paragraph 6, which we just snapshotted right there, Shoghi Effendi states that future historians will analyze how the administrative center of the faith has gravitated away from its cradle to the American continent. I love that imagery. Just as lit as though he talked about it's a pendulum now swinging, moving now to the American continent, the chief bulwark of its fast evolving institutions, and will immortalize the men and women who have participated in building the administrative order. So dear friends, I know we're talking America and the Most Great Peace, but this is all a direct tie-in to Advent. So don't get lost in America and the Most Great Peace, because every single concept is directly tied into Advent of divine justice. That's why I'm bringing all of this here now, and in our future sessions of America and the Most Great Peace, it's all tied in. Even to the last paragraph, you'll see it all tied in. And then we get back into paragraph 16 of Advent of divine justice. You'll see it is all tied in together. So that's really why I'm presenting it like this. So that golden millennium that was in the last line, it is a period of 1,000 years. That's what a millennium is, right? Millennium means a period of 1,000 years, the period of 1,000 years during which, according to one interpretation, Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 5, Christ will reign in person on earth. So that was one interpretation of the book of Revelation. And in God Passes By, it states, he who in such dramatic circumstances was made to sustain the overpowering weight of so glorious a mission was none other than the one whom posterity will acclaim, and whom innumerable followers already recognize as the judge, the lawgiver and redeemer of all mankind, as the organizer of the entire planet, as the unifier of the children of men, as the inaugurator of the long-awaited millennium, as the originator of a new universal cycle, as the establisher of the most great peace, as the fountain of the most great justice, as the proclaimer of the coming of age of the entire human race, as the creator of a new world order, and as the inspirer and founder of a world civilization. So this golden millennium is the age of Baha'u'llah. This is the long-awaited millennium. So, and you can see the funny cartoon on the right. Do you think mankind will ever experience a millennium? And it says, 1,000 years, a period of great happiness, good government, freedom from wickedness. God, this is something that every one of us as a Baha'i, we work towards to bring about this period. And we have about 10 minutes or so. So this is also in the last paragraph of Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. So this is also one of the World Order letters. And actually, I just finished a full presentation of this entire letter. So this is the last paragraph of Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, written February 8th, 1934. And this one that we're studying, America and the Most Great Peace, is Rezvan 1933. So this is in Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, it says, let no one, while this system is still in its infancy. And what system is this? The administrative order. So while this system is in its infancy, misconceive its character, belittle its significance, or misrepresent its purpose. Scott, could you kindly continue reading this? The bedrock. You're muted, dear Scott. Go for it.
I think you were reading, Scott, and somehow you muted yourself or something.
Yeah. I was trying to do a screen capture at the same time. Start where?
Go for it. Anywhere. Start from the beginning. Go for it.
Okay. Let no one, while this system is still in its infancy, misconceive its character, belittle its significance, or misrepresent its purpose. The bedrock on which this administrative order is founded is God's immutable purpose for mankind in this day. The source from which it derives its inspiration is no one less than Baha'u'llah himself. Its shield and defender are the embattled hosts of the Abha kingdom. Its seed is the blood of no less than 20,000 martyrs who have offered up their soul, their lives, that it may be born and flourish. The axis round which its institutions revolve are the authentic provisions of the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha. Its guiding principles are the truths which he who is the unerring interpreter of the teachings of our faith has so clearly enunciated in his public addresses throughout the West. The laws that govern its operation and limit its function are those which have been expressly ordained in the Kitab-i-Aqdas. The seat around which its spiritual, its humanitarian, and its administrative activities will cluster are the Mashriq al-Ashkar and its dependencies. The pillars that sustain its authority and buttress its structure are the twin institutions of the guardianship and of the Universal House of Justice. The central, the underlying aim which animates it is the establishment of the New World Order as adumbrated by Baha'u'llah. I'll have to look at that up. The methods it employs, the standard it inculcates, inclines it to neither East nor West, neither Jew nor Gentile, neither rich nor poor, neither white nor colored. Its watchword is the unification of the human race. Its standard, the most great peace. Its consummation, the advent of the golden millennium, the day when the kingdom of this world and shall have become the kingdom of God himself, the kingdom of Baha'u'llah.
Excellently read. Thank you, dear Scott. So adumbrated means symbolized, or foreshadowed. So this extract is the closing paragraph of Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. And here, when we start studying Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, for many paragraphs at the end of Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, the beloved guardian has gone to great lengths to define what this administrative order is, and namely the Universal House of Justice and the guardianship. And so, and in this closing paragraph, this is where he says, let no one, while this system is still in its infancy, misconceive its character, belittle its significance, or misrepresent its purpose. The bedrock on which this administrative order is founded is God's immutable purpose for mankind in this day. And its access is the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha. Its guiding principles are the truths which he who is the unerring interpreter of the teachings have so clearly enunciated in his public addresses throughout the West. The laws coming from the Kitab-i-Aqdas, ordained by the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the seat around which is spiritual, is the humanitarian and administrative activities will cluster are the Mashriq al-Ashkar, dependencies, the pillars that sustain its authority, namely the administrative order, are the twin institutions, the guardianship and Universal House of Justice. So this is the beloved guardian says, do not under any condition misconceive its character. Do not belittle the administrative order of Baha'u'llah. And then the beloved guardian at the very end, he says right here, the methods it employs, the standards it inculcates, inclines it neither to the East nor the West, Jew or Gentile, rich or poor, white or colored. Its watchword is the unification of the human race. So the watchword of the Administrative Order of Baha'u'llah is unification of the entire human race. The standard of the Administrative Order of Baha'u'llah is the most great peace. Its consummation, the advent of that golden millennium. Golden millennium, there we are again, dear friends, right? That we just read here in American, the most great peace. That we as the American Baha'i community will be these champion builders of the world order of Baha'u'llah and ushering in that golden millennium, the promise of which lies enshrined in his teachings. So this is paragraph 6, American, the most great peace, 1933. And in 1934, in dispensation of Baha'u'llah, he again uses this exact same term, talking about that the advent of the golden millennium, the day when the kingdoms of this world shall become the kingdom of God himself, the kingdom of Baha'u'llah. So this is what the golden millennium means. It's the days when the kingdoms of this world shall become the kingdom of Baha'u'llah. That's the closing remark of the beloved guardian after, I believe it's 127 paragraphs in, no, scratch that, 130 paragraphs. 130 paragraphs in Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. So 130 paragraphs, Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, is the last, as they say, concluding thoughts. He is reminding and giving a last warning. Last warning. Do not misconceive the character of the administrative order. Do not belittle its significance. Okay, let me check. Oh, we got like a few minutes. Okay, then paragraph 7. This paragraph 7, this, if you recall, he was now tying it to Islam and Christianity and saying that the early American Baha'i community had similarities to the earlier origins. So in paragraph 7, we see that both Christianity and Islam offer a striking parallel to the development of the faith, flourishing in lands more hospitable than the lands of the origin. I found that very interesting because when the faith originated as Christianity originated in Palestine, it really didn't grow, but when it really grew when it went into the West, and same as Islam. And so this is how the beloved guardian is writing as a macro sociologist, as they say. He's really looking at it from a surveying. And so the beloved guardian here mentions the Mosaic dispensation. So I put it in red here. As you all know, Moses was a messenger of God who appeared around 1300 before Christ. He brought teachings identified as the Pentateuch. This is the first 5 books of the Bible. And he successfully opposed Pharaoh. This is actually kind of funny how they write it. He successfully opposed Pharaoh. Like he, and he led the Jews out of Egypt and received the 10 commandments on Mount Sinai. And the Mosaic dispensation can be thought of as that period of time between Abraham, the messenger before Moses, and Jesus, the messenger who appeared after Moses. So use from the period of Abraham all the way to the period of Jesus. A dispensation can also be thought of as that period of time of the influence of a revelation, dominates previous revelation. So a dispensation can also be thought of as that period of influence. Also, there was another term of collapsing empire. This is in paragraph 7. It says here, have they not been compelled to acknowledge the superior valor and the trained efficiency which have enabled these standard bearers of the cause of Jesus Christ to erect the symbols of his world dominion on the ruins of a collapsing empire? So what does it mean, collapsing, ruins of a collapsing empire? So let us go to a collapsing empire. And as we all know, Gibbon was one of the beloved guardian's favorite book, The Fall The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire was the beloved guardian. He loved that book. So the collapsing empire is in reference to the Roman Empire. The reference here is to the development of the organization of early Christianity, which modeled itself on the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire collapsed in 476 CE. Nevertheless, Christianity was able to continue its expansion and development. Here the beloved guardian is saying, why are you modeling yourself after a collapsing empire, namely the Roman Empire, which is, it rose and it collapsed. The West was severely shaken when the city of Rome was sacked by the Visigoths. This is a wandering nation of Germanic peoples from the Northeast. And the fall of Rome was completed in 476 when the German chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustus, and the East, always richer and stronger, continued as the Byzantine through the European Middle Ages. So that was in reference to the collapsing empire. I just wanted you to get a reference to these terminologies that the beloved guardian is referencing. So we have a few more slides. Checking the time, it's exactly 4:01. We can end right here, dear John. And as always, we can pick up next week. Is that good for you, John? Or I just want to always stay punctual to your time schedule?
Well, how much do we have left?
Let me check. We have this. Hey, one more slide. Why not? Let's do that. Good. Let's do it, dear John. Let's do it. So, paragraph 8. This was a paragraph where the beloved guardian, he's now referencing Abdul Baha. And this is where he's talking about the West and that the faiths of God have all come from the East, but it is the West where the light truly emanates and gets magnified. So I reread this quotation. He says, the light of divine revelation have risen in the East and shed its radiance upon the West. The illumination thus shed hath, however, acquired in the West an extraordinary brilliancy. So granted, the light may have originated in the East, but it is being magnified, superimposed in the West. So this is my last slide, dear friends, on paragraphs 1 through 8 of America, the Most Great Peace. It says in paragraph 8, His Holiness Abdul Baha attests the light of divine revelation have arisen in the East and shed its radiance upon the West. And such was the case with Christianity. And Baha'u'llah states, whenever this robe hath fulfilled its purpose, the Almighty will assuredly renew it. For every age requireth a fresh measure of the light of God. Every divine revelation hath been sent down in a manner that befitted the circumstances of the age in which it hath appeared. And that's from Gleanings. So, dear friends, there we go. That is quick snapshot, paragraphs 1 through 8 of America, the Most Great Peace. And you can see how similar the themes of paragraph 16 is to even the first 8 paragraphs of America, the Most Great Peace. And then as we march along through America, the Most Great Peace, you'll get a much greater and deeper understanding when we get into and finish up paragraph 16 of Advent of Divine Justice. So that's why I wanted to, as they say, segue into America, the Most Great Peace in this session. So let me stop my share and return to everyone else. So thank you so much and for your patience today. And thank you very much, dear John, as always, and all of our wonderful readers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And everyone, as we've just gone through this session, we have other sessions that we'll be doing next week, a continuation of this theme on trying to understand this paragraph that we went over from Advent and Divine Justice and its background through World Order of Baha'u'llah.
That's exactly right.
So that is, what will the next letter be that we're going to work on next week?
So we're going to continue on America Most Great Peace, dear John. Okay, we'll finish America Most Great Peace. It's a short letter, so we'll finish it. Okay, because it's all tied together in that section of the first paragraphs. Once we finish it, then we jump back into Advent, and then you'll see how much the beloved guardian in America the Most Great Peace ties that to Advent to divine justice. And you'll have a much greater understanding. For example, I'll give you an instance. When the beloved guardian talks about defections, he was referencing, for example, Ibrahim Khairullah, right? And he was talking about that episode. But then he talks about, but in America the Most Great Peace, it goes into detail and talks about it. And there's pages about it. And then he even talks about his generals that he sent. Namely, he sent his generals to go and bring back the unity of the early American Baha'i community. So we're going to go into detail, talking about how did Abdul Baha, sitting in Palestine, working to bring back the unity of this early American Baha'i community that was really attacked at the root by really technically the second Baha'i that's was on the shores of America, namely Khairullah. The first was Anton Haddad, and he left very early on, but it was really Ibrahim Khairullah who started the American Baha'i community and was very prominent, and everyone knew of him. And what happened, what transpired. So we're going to get into that also in Advent to Divine Justice class too. So it's going to be very interesting coming up. But I wanted to set the stage because the beloved guardian wrote this history first. Okay, so that's why I'm going to America the Most Great Peace. Then we jump back into Advent. Okay. It's going to be good. I promise you, it's going to be really good. You're going to see some really interesting things I've found.
So there you have it, everyone. Please make sure to, most importantly, just show up. Everything's done for you, all the homework. I was going to say, do your homework, but if you want to.
Also, dear friends, I saw my dear Scott taking slide shots. If you want the slides, just email Dear John. I'm going to send him all the slides, and Dear John can send the slides themselves to you. So I'm not attached to the work that I've created. So if you want a copy for your own personal study, that's really what the Clinton Academy is about. I want you guys to study it. That's it. So if you want the slides themselves, just email Dear John, and he can forward them on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And for those of you watching on Facebook and YouTube, more importantly, those of you watching after the fact, please contact us on clearwaterbaha'i.org. We have the means by which you can contact us there. Just submit your request, and we will be happy to get to you when Jeremiah checks the email. So again, thank you for your patience in advance as we get the material to you. So with that being said, I hope you all have a very beautiful Sunday. See you on August 29.
That's right.
Good everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Awesome. We didn't do a closing prayer, but that's okay. You closed it off. That's cool. Very good, dear John. Thank you.